to possess it. So Sukkot was the time of the reading of the law for the purpose that they would hear, learn, fear God, for the ultimately accumulating in that they would observe it. Okay, a lot of scholars see a parallel between this and Revelation 5, when the Lamb, there was none found worthy to open the book. But the Lamb was found worthy to open the book and to open the seals thereof. That's a very interesting study. All right, let's go back to Leviticus. Let's find out what else there is embedded here. Leviticus 23, verse 41 now. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. All right, and ye shall keep it a feast unto the Lord 7 days in the year, and it should be a statute forever. Well, we learned in our study of the Sukkot's names during the Feast of Nations that the Lord really does mean forever. It's going to be celebrated through the millennium. We have record of that. He really does mean forever. Okay, moving on to the final name for this morning. Shall be celebrated as a statute forever in your generations, and ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month, and ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. Okay. Booths. Okay. Feast of Tabernacles, number 9. It is obviously, we know that name, the Feast of Tabernacles. The men would leave their houses and would dwell in booths for 1 entire week. The men, not the women or the children. They could join, but the commandment was for the men, as with all of these festivals. The commandment was upon the men who, as heads of the households, they covered those under their spiritual authority. Now, different Feasts of Tabernacles, they were commanded to rejoice along with them, but the command of most things was upon the men as the spiritual heads of the home. So Sukkot is the Hebrew, is the plural. Sukkah is singular. Sukkot is plural, tabernacles. Sukkah is singular, tabernacle. Okay, this is translated in a myriad of different ways. Booth, mostly, or habitation, covering, tent, hut, lair, tabernacle, cottage, covert, den, pavilion, shelter. A lot of different ways. So these men would take the palms and willows that we read about up here and make their booths out of them. And the most important factor of this sukkah was that it was a temporary dwelling. Now, the Bible just gives a general, broad command to build one. And naturally, the rabbis added great detail. But, naturally. So, this is a cool bit of info. Once constructed, a major point of observation is that they actually eat there, even now, when they don't technically live in it. A lot of times they eat there. There it is, they eat there. Now, this has been customary for a long time. This is an ancient tradition that they would set a place for a symbolic guest. Sometimes even 7 extra guests. They would invite 7 symbolic guests into the sukkah. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Aaron, Moses, and David, as parts of the mitzvah of hospitality. Now, is that just a man-made custom exclusively, or was there a tiny bit of inspiration behind it? In the New Testament, Matthew 8:11, Jesus is speaking here, and he says, I say unto you that many shall come from the from the east and the west. That's kind of reminds me of that racial part, kind of giving us a little bit of context of where to place this. And I say to you that many shall come from the east and the west and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. It's kind of cool, kind of interesting. Just a little bit of inspiration going on there. All right. So anyway, there are a lot of ways to slice this building of a sukkah and what all it means and its importance. That would be contextually correct. I mean, you can tell, right, that all these themes and meanings of the feast are all maddeningly overlayered and overlapping and deep and high and wide to the nth degree. Now, at a basic level, we know it's done in remembrance of the Lord's divine protection. It says that you may know that I made the children to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So it's done in remembrance of the Lord's divine protection. His protection, His leading, and a reminder of the time when His glory cloud led them, and we can be sure of that same faithfulness watching over us. It's also in remembrance of the temporary dwellings that they lived in the wilderness on the way to the promised land, that we are strangers and pilgrims in this world, that our eternal dwelling place is yet to come. You're losing your job over there. Okay. Pastor over there. All right. That we are on our way to the promised land. Our eternal dwelling place is yet to come. Amen. It's also done in remembrance of the glory that descended on God's Sukkot, His tabernacle, and of His love and still wanting us and wanting to tabernacle with us. It's also done to symbolize our need of His provision. That we needed Him. We were in a desert. We need His provision. We're kind of up a creek if we don't have His provision. We're dead men. And it is a symbol of as the building of the temple was a symbol of their wanting to be right with God again, wanting things to be as it were, so is the indication of our final desire for reconciliation. And in Jewish liturgy, the temple is often referred to as a sukkah of peace. I like that. Or as the sukkah of David. And the building of the sukkah is a reenactment of the building of the tabernacle. And so the Lord became flesh and dwelt among us. The skene is a Greek word derived from tabernacle. So John 1:14 should actually be read more like this. And the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, and we saw His Shekinah. The Shekinah of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. That's a little bit richer, don't you think? Okay, and Emmanuel, Elohim with us. His sukkah was a physical body. It really just does all fit together. Okay. So those are all valid, contextual, correct ways to view this. But there's always something deeper. There's always something deeper. The deeper understanding of what building a sukkah means comes in this verse 43 here in Leviticus. He shall dwell in booths, why? He shall dwell in booths, verse 42, he shall dwell in booths 7 days, all that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. That, verse 43, he's given us the why. Okay, build it up. Here's the reason. All of this stuff. Here's the reason. Here's the reason. Heads up. That your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So it's done. We will know that He brought us out of the land of Egypt. Hold the phone. The purpose of tabernacles is a big, gigantic arrow pointing backwards to Passover. You're supposed to be doing Sukkot, so you remember what He did at Passover. Tabernacles is a form of us crossing over into eternity. How does this fit the formula? How does this fit the formula? Tabernacles at the end. It's all over when we get to Sukkot. So how does this fit the formula? Did God just forget to cross the T or dot an I here? Oops, it all fits except for this one little thing. Let's look at that. This is what our topic is in conclusion this morning. This is our last topic. In conclusion, how does that possibly fit? How does that fit? Because we know it's all about end times, crossing over into eternity. How does that fit? All right, follow me here. I'm going to be still driving the car in the same direction, just changing gears. Still going in the same direction. This feast of the 7th month was to point them to the feast of the first month. Just want to make sure we're on the same page. The end feast was to remind them of the beginning feast. Tabernacles was to remind them of Passover. Okay, so what we're trying to figure out is why and how this possibly fits. Every jot and tittle of Scripture is there for a divine purpose. There is a purpose, literally down to the letters. You know, Bible codes, for example, it is there for a divine purpose. There is no mistakes. Divine purpose. We've already studied a few of the Lord's, our Savior's actions in a Feast of Sukkot during His first coming. And we saw that it was plainly with deliberate reason and purpose that He acted and spoke as He did. Water, I am the light. His message on those days was the message of the feast. So it is also plain and indicates that His other actions during that feast will be thematically grounded and rooted in the Sukkot message. So the deeper significance of why we yearly observe Sukkot, this building of the Sukkah, is held in another speech recorded from that same Sukkot festival. Let's go one last time to John 7. John 7. And we're still in the same place. Later on we know He's going to do the light of the world and the water, and He's going to heal the blind man. What happened before that? Verse 7, it's the same time. Okay, in verse 2, we see that it's the Feast of Tabernacles, so we know it's the same deal. And then verse 14 says, now about the midst of the feast. Okay, so it's the feast. This is the context. We're in the feast. And He's talking back and forth with some of these morons. And Jesus answers them and said, my doctrine is not mine, but His that sent me. If any man will do His will, His being the Father, the one that sent the Son, if any man do the will of the Father, he shall know the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself.
Yeah.
Okay, just follow me here. So, do the will of the Father. You shall know the doctrine, whether it is of God or not. Yeah. So, doing His will,
yes.
When you do His will, that is what you call obedience.
Yes.
So, doing His will is obedience. So it is a correct statement, according to this verse, that obedience breeds discernment.
Yes,
obedience breeds discernment. Okay, we have three thoughts here that we're looking at. That's the first one. As to why Tabernacles is a big arrow to Passover. This does all fit together. Obedience breeds discernment. That's first thought. Now we find why would He bring that up in Sukkot? How is that thematically grounded and rooted in Sukkot? It obviously is. He's talking about it. So why? Let's go to 1 Corinthians 10. In this chapter, 1 Corinthians 10, Paul is speaking of this first generation who received the law, enumerating all their trials and failures as they left Egypt and began their journey on the way to the Promised Land. Okay, so that's the context. Now let's go to verse 11 in that chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians. Now all these things, which you've just got through enumerating, happened to them for examples, and they were written for our admonition. Alright, well that's where most people end the quote. They don't finish the verse. There's a little bit more to it. Let's continue on. They are written for our admonition, upon whom, verse 11 in that chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians. Now all these things that you've just got through enumerating happened to them for examples and they were written for our admonition. Alright, well that's where most people end the quote. They don't finish the verse. There's a little bit more to it. Let's continue on. They are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come.
Yes.
Okay, so all of the law, I'm going to make the statement and then build it. All of the law, the Old Testament, was written specifically for those who would see the end of the world. Wait for the definition upon whom the ends of the world will come. The law and Old Testament were written specifically for those who would see the end of the world. We are going to see the end of the world. Us. This is us. Okay. So, obviously in a broad sense, the Torah is for everyone. But as the end gets closer and closer, the statement gets more and more personally relevant, more and more profound. So it was written primarily for this generation. Think about that. Really ponder what that means. This was written for this generation.
That's right.
All right. Personally relevant. It was written that primarily this generation, for this generation, as it says, that will not pass away till all be fulfilled. That generation, that is us. We know, we can tell it. We know what the season. We know the hour of our visitation is coming. Okay, so keep that thought in mind. Obedience breeds discernment. The law was written for the last generation. The law was written for the last generation. Okay, two thoughts in mind. All right, the third and final point. At our current point in history, which is the end times, we know that spirit of the Antichrist, that anti-Mashiach, is alive and well and is multiplying in power and potency every day. Well, what is the spirit of this age, of that Antichrist? Deception. He will do all these marvelous wonders through which he will deceive all those who receive the mark. He's going to be locked up for 1,000 years, so he, quote, will deceive the nations no more for a season. That spirit is already at work. Okay, so those are those spirit principles. Now we have this circle. Let's connect this. Follow me here. The spirit of the age that we're in, we are the last generation, is deception. That the last generation will be living in is in the age of deception. The law was written for that generation. And obedience breeds discernment. Discernment to defeat the deception. Following me now? Okay, discernment comes from obeying his suggestions, no, his law, which was written for this generation that would face the most powerful demonic spirit to ever operate on this earth. The spirit that is coming in the tribulation is already at work in the world. The spirit of that satanic trinity is deception.
Yes, it is.
Now, we're not going to know who that specific person is, but we most certainly, every one of us, will personally deal with that spirit of the age.
Amen.
Already we are. Ephesians 5:16 and 17 says, redeem the time because the days are evil.
Yes.
Therefore be ye not unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. What is his will? To do his commandments. It's a constant circle. So to do his commandments, you're going to reap discernment.
Yeah.
You want discernment? Obey him.
Oh, yes.
So that means, deduced, if you want to do it in opposites now, if you're not doing, knowing, or studying his law, you will be deceived.
Yes, that's exactly right.
If it's true one way, it's going to be true in the reverse.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, we were trying to figure out the answers to these questions. Why? What is the purpose of the 7th month being to remind us of Passover, that first month? He wanted us to remember, I brought you out of Egypt. Well, how does this is a cool thing here, but how does that do it? I brought you out of Egypt. God knew that the generation in the end, this generation right here, as a collective, is either will have lost or be in disregard of his law.
That's right.
The very weapon he specifically forged for them for this battle.
That's right. That's right.
Remember, Sukkot was a time when they opened the Ark of the Covenant and read his law so that they would hear, that they would learn, that they would fear, ultimately resulting that they would observe it.
Yes.
But remember, the Christian church is telling us it's old, it's passed away.
That's right.
That's what leaders tell us. That righteous living is at odds with grace and faith. That couldn't be any further from the truth.
That's right. That's right.
That is a completely other sermon. I can't get into it today. So these days we must be rooted and established in Him.
Right. Yes.
But to be rooted, you have to know the tree to which you've been grafted into. It's not Judaizing to say we need to return to the first generation, that first century. What was it that they really did? Not trading different cultures, traditions of men.
That's right.
What is it? What is the real truth here? What did the Lord Himself practice?
Amen.
All right. We have to know that tree to which we've been grafted in.
Yes.
Okay, so this 8th day. This dispensational week is over. 7,000 years. Yom Torah was judgment. Yom Kippur was forgiveness. Sukkot was reconciliation. Well, what's eternity? Restoration. Finally, creation is being restored back to that perfect state. There's still going to be death in the new millennium.
Yeah.
The child shall die at 100 years old. It's back to that state of between the fall and the flood. It's back between, and there's not going to be fear. The animals aren't going to fear us, but there's still going to be death. Creation is going to be finally restored back to that perfect state in the garden that the Lord ultimately wanted all along, to walk in the cool of the day with man. So the men would return home to their tabernacles on this 8th day and settle back into their homes. The resurrection, newness, happened the morrow after the Sabbath. The couple now is free to go home and live together as husband and wife in the full covenant of marriage. This is the happily ever after part that they've been waiting for.
Hallelujah.
Since John 16:21 says that as soon as a woman is delivered of the child, she remembers no more the anguish for joy that a man is born into the world. 1 Corinthians 2:9 pretty much just sums up this 8th day. And that we just really don't know. I have not seen, nor ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love Him. Praise you, Lord.